Everything the politicians don't want you to know about Ukraine. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. I'll get into that in just a second, but I want to quickly mention that if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at Edify.app. That is the online platform for faith-based podcasts. You can also get Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com and wherever podcasts are offered. You remember Senator Rand Paul a few weeks back when he dared to raise the question about the amount of U.S. tax dollars flowing into Ukraine and talking about the matter of accountability, making sure that the money wasn't spent on corrupt purposes, making sure the money got into the hands of the people that it was supposed to get into. Remember these headlines? Rand Paul blocks Senate vote to advance Ukraine war aid bill, May 13th, 2022, from Washington Post. Senator Rand Paul single-handedly holds up $40 billion of U.S. aid to Ukraine, May 12th, 2022, The Guardian. Rand Paul delays $40 billion in aid for Ukraine, the New York Times. And boy, did Senator Paul pay for it in terms of the backlash from the politicians who wanted to spend without making sure the money got into the hands of those that it was supposed to get into. Well, I have a guest today, and she has such important information that she's basically taking up the whole half hour of Bold and Blunt podcasts. Her name is Rebecca Koffler. She is the author of the very timely book, Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. And let me just read a bit from her bio page on Simon & Schuster. Rebecca Koffler is a Russian-born U.S. intelligence expert who served as a Russian doctrine and strategy specialist in America's Defense Intelligence Agency, working with the DIA and with the CIA's National Clandestine Service. She has led red teams during war games and advised senior Pentagon officials. She has delivered classified briefings to top U.S. military commanders, NATO ministers, the directors of the CIA and DIA, the White House National Security Council, and senior congressional staff. In her post-public service career, Rebecca has been a writer and national security commentator whose work has been published on the Fox News website, the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, The Hill, and so on and so on and so on. She's appeared on Fox News, Fox Business, Fox Nation, Newsmax, and so on and so on. In other words, Rebecca Koffler knows what she's talking about. And what's even most interesting is that she brings to the table of discussion of Russia-Ukraine conflicts a very different viewpoint than you will hear on your national TV or read on your national media sites. Why? Because, as she points out, as we discuss, there's some censorship going on. So, without further ado, Rebecca Koffler, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Of course, it's my pleasure, Cheryl.
So let's talk about Ukraine and Russia and Joe Biden's foreign policy, starting with this question. Why aren't we in America allowed to ask how much money we're sending to Ukraine without being condemned as insensitive?
Well, I think the reason why is that because our government, and especially the Washington establishment, they want to hide the mistakes and all of the disasters of their foreign policy, because once you start asking such questions, the atrocious, lack of strategy by the Biden administration will be exposed for everyone to see. What do I mean by that? We spent 20 years in Afghanistan, $2.2 trillion and 6,000 lives, American lives alone. I'm not even counting the allies. And then, after the disastrous withdrawal, who is back in power in Afghanistan? It's Taliban, right? So Ukraine is turning into the same fiasco because we've spent more in 6 months in Ukraine than we've spent in 5 years in Afghanistan. in Ukraine for months and years and as long as needed. Well, that's why they don't want us asking questions, is because the American people are going to find out why it is that we're struggling ourselves with our, economy going down, and why we continue to help somebody who is not even a NATO member.
Yeah, let's talk about that first for a minute. Prior to Russia-Ukraine aggressions under Joe Biden, Ukraine was considered one of the most corrupt governments in the world. What happened to that?
It still remains corrupt, Cheryl, despite the narrative that, again, the Washington establishment has successfully convinced most of the media, the traditional media, and most of the left-leaning people. Ukraine is 123rd out of 180 on the corruption scale. And the person who bankrolled President Zelensky's presidential campaign, the notorious Ukrainian oligarch Igor Kolomoisky, he is on the no-entry list to the United States, him and his entire family. Why? It's because he's under multiple investigations for corruption. And so, yes, Ukrainians are fighting, with the onslaught by Putin, by the Russian forces, but to claim that they are fighting for democracy is a big, lie. It's a disinformation. What's happening is there's a proxy war right now between the United States and NATO and Russia over the control of the strategic area, which Ukraine is, full of natural resources. It's the breadbasket of Europe, and it's in Putin's eyes, it provides the security perimeter on which Russia relied on for centuries. But for us, if we abandon our support for Ukraine, it would basically negate 70 years worth of U.S. foreign policy. And so neither side can now back down. Neither side can climb off the tree, as I would say, and we are sleepwalking into a nuclear disaster potentially, because when Putin is losing, which he is right now, Ukraine has been conducting successful counteroffensive. So when he is losing, he's going to ratchet up, and the Russian doctrine envisions the use of tactical nuclear weapons to de-escalate conflict. That's where the Biden administration is taking America into, the nuclear furnace.
Wow. I want to talk about that more at length, but I wanted to throw this question in there because I don't know if you've heard the whispers, but is there something even more nefarious going on? Because I've heard whispers about money laundering and the too close for comfort, cozy relationships between the Biden family and overseas sources. What's your response to that? First off, have you heard that? And second off, what's your response?
Absolutely. These are no longer whispers, Cheryl. I think we have all the evidence that we need thanks to the investigative work that is going on, that unfortunately the corrupt officials in the U.S. intelligence community want to, again, conceal from the American people, right? The so-called, quote-unquote, Russian disinformation of the Hunter Biden's notorious laptop, right, is a lie. There was no Russian disinformation on that one. It's just a convenient lie that there's 50 intelligence officials, right? These are the people who we are supposed to trust 100%. These are the people who are supposed to protect our homeland from security threats. And what they're doing is they're spreading Soviet-style, Putin playbook-type disinformation. Yes, we know that Hunter Biden and that entire family, just like, by the way, the Clinton family, Biden is really not, an exception in that regard. They are pursuing corrupt dealings with, and not just with Ukraine, it's also Russia. Remember Hillary Clinton and the whole nuclear issue there that she was pursuing with the Russians, okay? But it's also with the Chinese that our entire Washington establishment apparatus is corrupt. They're pursuing close ties with foreign adversaries. In the meantime, they are looking to start these wars that guess who goes to fight? It's the brave men and women from the red states, okay? No longer the military is drawing their forces, their recruits, their volunteers from both blue and red. It's mostly predominantly red states. It's the blue-collar types, the patriots, the Americans, and these politicians are just simply sending them into the wars that, that don't produce any tangible and successful results. Again, 20 years later, the same notorious Taliban is back in power. So why did all these men and women die?
Go back to what you said about Putin pressed in a corner, lashing out with nuclear war. How would that scenario unfold, including specifically what would he target?
Sure. So the so-called nuclear doctrine, it's called escalate to de-escalate, was developed specifically on Putin's orders. Why? It's because the Russian strategists have concluded through their long-term strategic intelligence forecasting that a war between the United States and NATO on one side and Russia is inevitable. I repeat those words, inevitable. They've done that through forecasting, through wargaming. And as we know, it's unfolding right now exactly according the doctrine. I predicted this war in Ukraine in my book, Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. So, the Russians know that conventionally they are inferior. Our combat readiness, our forces, our precision strike guided munitions and weaponry, that, by the way, it's been right now, our weapon supply is being degraded, but we can get to that too. So, that's why they decided that they have a nuclear trump card, so to speak. So the doctrine envisions the detonation of a low-yield nuclear warhead in the theater, okay? And where's the theater of combat operations right now? It's in Ukraine. So the idea of that is to stun the West and to prevent the NATO forces from entering the conflict as an active combatant, because that would demonstrate, supposedly, that's his vision, right? Resolve. And in the meantime, there would be a strategic tactical pause, rather, during which Putin will push through and either topple Kiev or, there are multiple scenarios that we can't get into, obviously, in the not unclassified environment, but that's how it works. The reason he chose low yield is because, in his view, it's not going to, it's not going to destroy this civilization like the strategic nuclear weapons and the whole Cold War time doctrine that both sides, the former Soviet Union and U.S., adhere to, the so-called MAD, right, mutual assured destructive. Mm-hmm. But this one is going to have small fallout. It's 1/3 in terms of the power that the United States dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and so it would cause, thyroid cancer and those types of things. But these are long-term effects. So what she's hoping for is to dislodge Ukraine psychologically, as well as NATO and the United States, and compel us to stand down so he can finish his business with Ukraine. That's the idea.
Let's talk about two separate matters, avoidance and an exit strategy. How could this have been avoided even past a Donald Trump administration, right? Is there any way that this could have been avoided? And second off, now that we're here and you can't turn back the clock and go back in time and avoid it, what would be a smart exit strategy for the United States?
Sure. So on the first one, how could this have been avoided? The best thing was not to start it in the first place, right? And I'll just explain briefly why Putin didn't dare doing this during the 45th administration, despite the fact that the media and the leftists, and especially the intelligence officials, false narrative that they spread about the so-called quote-unquote Trump-Russia collusion. Trump pursued the former president the most robust foreign policy against Russia since Ronald Reagan. He did three things that, scared the heck out of Putin and struck at the heart of the Russian anti-U.S. doctrine and strategy. Trump stood up the space forces. Trump, and I'll explain why it's important, Trump authorized offensive cyber operations against Russia and other foreign adversaries that conduct cyber attacks on our networks. And Trump also authorized the development of a low-yield nuclear warhead for our own forces, which basically negated Russian whole doctrine, okay, that we just talked about, the escalate to de-escalate.
Right.
Well, the minute that Joe Biden gets in power, he canceled that program for the low-yield nuclear warhead, okay? So those three things that I just articulated deterred Putin, plus the fact that Trump was very forceful. No, he never, called Putin a killer or any of the buzzwords that Biden did, because Putin is not afraid of words. Putin is afraid of actions. And what Trump did, in addition to these three things, he authorized a missile strike on the Russian forces in Syria that killed 300 of them. So Putin knew Trump meant business, okay? So the minute that Biden came to power, all of the deterrence evaporated because what Biden and his administration projected was weakness. And remember how Biden was negotiating the so-called security guarantees. Meanwhile, Putin was assembling gradually and steadily 190,000 troops encircling Kiev. So that showed Putin. So, no, once Biden came to power, it couldn't have been avoided because he was just inviting Putin to do that. Okay. In terms of the exit strategy, I don't have anything, positive to say at this point, Cheryl, and it's really, really a great concern for me because, as I said, neither side can climb down the tree. Wow. Putin cannot, right now, retreat. He's not going to pack up and go, as some of the analysts predict, because there are 5 reasons. I wrote a piece about that, 5 top reasons why Putin cannot stop his war on Ukraine. It's because they view the Russians, that is, and his entire apparatus and the entire strategy component of it is that Ukraine's potential absorption into NATO and into the Western sphere of influence presents an existential threat for them. And people can go to that piece and really read the details. But for us, we cannot climb down that tree either because we have invested so much already. We have committed. And I've already, to be honest with you, have lost track. I think the last one was $62 billion.
Yes.
Okay, of U.S. taxpayers, hard-earned money at the same time when our own folks are struggling, to get gas in their cars and, can't find, sanitary napkins and tampons and those kinds of things, and baby formula.
Yep.
Reminds me exact of what I had to live with in the former USSR. So there is no exit strategy, and it doesn't seem like the Biden administration is developing one because they continue, providing weapons to Ukraine to help them fight the Russians in order to degrade the Russian military, as Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin stated very clearly himself. But guess what? What is happening in the meantime is we're eroding our own combat readiness by depleting our own weapons supply. And we have China to deal with. So she is just delighted that the two militaries that he views as the main threat to him are basically going at each other, degrading each other's military capabilities and combat readiness. And as Joe Biden himself and his administration admitted, China, they prioritize China as the top threat, not Russia. Well, how the heck are we going to defend Taiwan if we have no weaponry to defend? It's just another complete strategic incompetence on the part of the Biden administration that they're exhibiting.
You know, I know our time is up, but I have two other questions that I want to ask you. Do you have time?
Of course.
Okay, so the first question I wanted to ask you was that it sounds very bleak, and the Joe Biden administration just keeps throwing, as you pointed out, millions, billions, however many billions of dollars at the problem. But the thing to me that's infuriating is the media constantly drums up the sad situation of the Ukrainian people to pull taxpayers into thinking that this is a great way to spend our money and to give the people compassion, which the people deserve compassion, of course, but we can't pay for every downtrodden individual in the world. So what's the media's angle on this? Why does the media keep doing poor justice and putting forward the political repercussions that you outlined and not allowing alternative voices on the media to bring forward viewpoints like you bring?
Exactly, Cheryl. It's really a disaster. It's very alarming because it looks like the media is again using Putin's playbook of manipulating the narrative. Yes, our hearts go out, to the Ukrainian people and all the sufferings that Putin has dealt to them. But again, like you said, we want everyone to live in democracy. We want Ukrainians, Afghans, Syrians, every single person in the world. But it's impossible, to have democracy in some of these countries because it's not within their culture, it's not within their history, it's not something that we can bring in to them as a gift. And also, we can't sponsor every single government. And so the media is really doing a disservice, and I don't know whether it's deliberate and all this tear-jerking going on. I'll tell you, I had a hard time placing my analytic piece regarding Ukraine turning into an Afghanistan-type fiasco because there's an implicit self-censorship that's going on right now in the mainstream media. They don't want an alternative point of view. They want the party line. We support Ukraine no matter what, even though there are clearly indications and warnings that the Ukrainian government is misusing some of that security aid, A. One problem. Problem B is that some of the weaponry is ending up in the black market. And Victoria Stars, the Ukrainian congresswoman, warned about that, and she was attacked by both sides, both by Ukrainians and by the Democrats in the United States. And they were calling her basically as pro-Kremlin, pro-Putin, and she's Ukrainian-born. She's not. It's the same thing. They basically attack everyone whose point of view does not align with the party line. And again, this is a sign that our own society is basically on a path to turning into a USSR 2.0, because once you start, allowing censorship like that, and you eliminate clear out their opinion, which is the bedrock of democracy, then you're a very slippery slope. And once your intelligence agencies start spreading disinformation like about the Hunter Biden. It was their disinformation, not the Russian disinformation. Then you can't get to the ground truth, and you can't defend your country if you don't have accurate intelligence assessments of the threat, and it just goes on from there. So we're very on the slippery slope, and that needs to stop.
Oh, yeah, very fast-moving slippery slope. And just one last question, Rebecca, because you aptly laid out how it was very interesting how you described China is standing in the background sort of in cheering Russia and America, our tussle over Ukraine and so forth. And they're looking at it as a way of degrading our military, which makes perfect sense. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the meeting between China and Russia, and in any way, is that alarming to you?
Absolutely. It is very alarming, Cheryl. The so-called, quote-unquote, no-limit strategic partnership that Putin and Xi have formed is an existential threat to the United States, and I also wrote an analytic piece on that. They met at the SCO summit, SCO being the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is the Asia's version of NATO and the EU, so to speak. And Putin and Xi really, although they're not true allies in the way that the United States and Great Britain, let's say, are allies, but they are marriage of convenience, and they have formed this partnership to counter the United States and the liberal democratic world order that we pursue, in the world, and they, the China and the Russia strategic tandem, if you will, they would like the world to have the authoritarian, form of government. But at minimum, they want to pursue like transactional type approach. And they have trained their forces together, right before that meeting that you're talking about on September 15th and 16th, the Russian and the Chinese conducted a strategic war game called Vostok 2022, which means East 2022, off the coast of Japan, in the Sea of Japan and the Sea of Okhotsk. There are 12 other countries that were participating, and they were practicing, and I quote, a joint special operation to neutralize the threat that was coming supposedly from the United States, South Korea, and Japan. So these two are not joking around. While our Pentagon is busy, worrying about which pronouns to use, those forces, and by the way, in addition to China and Russia, Iran is joining, that SCO organization, right? And they already have India, they already have Pakistan. So those countries are not joking around, right? So what the Biden administration has done is basically pushed all of these dictators. It's creating the coalition of dictators, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and all the main U.S. adversaries who are already hell-bent on defeating and undermining the United States. And there are various ways of doing it, obviously, but some of it is long-term. And so, Biden administration's misplaced priorities are really energizing and motivating these adversaries to act right now during his first term, while they believe that our government is in a very weak position, and why economically, we're in a weak position because the sanctions that we are placing on Putin and others, they have backfired because Putin sanction-proofed his economy, and so the impact is not as dramatic as the Biden administration's quote-unquote experts planned it to be. Because Putin is like, we cannot dismiss. People think that he's an idiot. Putin is not an idiot. He's a very strategic, judo-minded person. He has a PhD in economics. His top economic advisor is MIT trained. Cheryl, is Vera Nabiulna. She went to MIT, got her training, got back. So we're dealing with a very sophisticated adversary, and unfortunately the Biden administration is not in a good position to look at the battlefield holistically. They're just looking at one bright and shiny object, Ukraine. In the meantime, they're not looking at how they're depleting our own weapon supply and how they're going to deal with all these other threats, Russia, China, North Korea, cyber threats, space warfare threats. So none of it is factored in our strategy. And we don't even have one. I don't see one.
Rebecca, could America be taken over by China or Russia or some of their partners before the end of Joe Biden's first term?
No, Cheryl. America cannot be taken over. I assume what you mean by taken over is, if you assume militarily, then no, there are no such plan. It's very important to understand how this threat emanates. So neither Russia nor China plan to strike the United States in a blue out of the blue, right? With a missile strike. But the way that the escalation could occur if we, the United States, intervene in a regional conflict such as the one in Ukraine and such as the one, in Taiwan, let's say, because Taiwan has a one China policy, right? And we, by going there, Nancy Pelosi did and some others, and we're just unnecessarily antagonizing the situation at a very, very peculiar time right now, very precarious time. And so if we get dragged in, right, that's when those types of doctrines like the Russian escalate to de-escalate would be activated. And given that Russia has a 10-to-1 advantage ratio in tactical nukes, we have 200, they have 2,000. That's how that could occur, right? So, no, they're not going to take us over like during the Biden administration, but they are marching very steadily in destabilizing our country. How? Remember, because they regularly infiltrate spies and influence operatives. Remember Fang Fang, right? The Chinese spy who got very closely to Congressman Eric Swalwell. This is very closely, pun intended, by the way. And so they penetrate routinely Russia and China, our business groups, political groups, activist groups, to really sow corruption, foment discord both countries. So that is the threat. It's a long-term threat of destabilization and subversion, and it's a short-term acute threat in the event that the United States intervene in an ongoing regional conflict like the ones that is going on right now. And the main concern that I have at this point is the two-theater war, which is, if China and Russia decide to synchronize their combat operations, and they believe that they could challenge our combat readiness. And although the Pentagon has an ongoing doctrine that we supposedly are able to fight two wars at the same time in two separate combat theater of operations, but the fact that we can't even recruit, enough volunteers to our military, partially because people have become less patriotic because of all of these, ridiculous policies that the leftists pursue, and partially it's because of physical inability, because people with all these, watching video games and everything, they've lost their, the health standards that would allow them to meet the requirements. So our combat readiness is right now is degraded in my assessment, and that is why Putin and Xi view that there's a good chance, I'm not saying that they're going to do that, but if something like that were to happen, the first term of the Biden administration, and probably the only one, that's going to be the timing for them to do that. That's the threat.
Wow, so many threats under this president. And Rebecca Koffler, author of Putin's Playbook. You are a wealth of information. I want to thank you so much for your time. I know we went double, but it was really crucial information. Thank you very much.
Of course. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Cheryl Chumley, with you and your audience on Bold and Blunt.
Thank you. The book, once again, is Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. And you ought to pick up your copy because this is a woman who knows exactly what she's talking about. And it's a viewpoint that you're not going to hear very frequently on most of your mainstream media outlets. Why? Because it's not the story the politicians want told. It's not the narrative that the media wants put out there. So check it out, Putin's Playbook. And in the meanwhile, I want to thank you for listening to Bold and Blunt. Remind you that you can get Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com, at Edify.app, or wherever podcasts are offered. One more quick note, pick up a copy of my latest book. It is called Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. If you think the coronavirus is going away and the left is done exploiting the fear of the virus for political gain, think again. Joe Biden may have declared the pandemic is over, but guess what? It didn't take long for the bureaucrats in the health departments at the federal level and at the global level to come out swinging and say, wait a minute, Joe, it's not quite over yet. What they mean is they're not done using the virus in its various variants for political use. Lockdown, check it out. Thank you again for listening. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.